From her breathing pattern, to her trigger discipline, to 5 perfect shots at impossible range, every detail screamed one thing. This woman was no random shooter. She was trained at a level most soldiers never even hear about, and the officers mocking her were about to realize they were standing in front of a legend.
So tell me, sweetheart, what's your rank? Or are you just here to polish our rifles? The Admiral's voice was like gravel, dripping with sarcasm as he and his 6 officers strolled over the firing line. They thought they were so clever, but they were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. If you've ever felt underestimated, you're going to love this story, so stick around to see what happens. Here they were, out in the blistering desert heat at Fort Davidson, where about 15 people were trying to qualify. The woman they were mocking didn't even flinch. She was 29 with the solid posture of a soldier, but her uniform was completely blank, no name, no rank. She just sat there in the shade, her hands moving with a smooth, practiced rhythm over the pieces of a disassembled M110 sniper rifle. She was methodically cleaning every single part, each movement so precise, it was clear this skill came from thousands of hours of muscle memory, not from some manual. Admiral Victor Kane, all 58 years of him, swaggered closer. His chest was a billboard of shiny metals, and his face was stuck in a permanent scowl that screamed, "Obey me." His shadow fell over her, but she didn't break her rhythm. "I asked you a question, miss," he growled. His number 2, a 32-year-old lieutenant named Brooks with a tan and a smug grin, sauntered up beside him, crossing his arms like he owned the place. "Maybe she doesn't speak English, sir," Brooks sneered. "Probably just the cleaning crew. You know how they let anyone wander around these days." The other officers chuckled along. A kid, a junior lieutenant, so new he was practically glowing, elbowed his buddy. $10 says she can't even load it." His friend shot back. 20 says she's never fired anything bigger than a 9mm. But across the range, the old rangemaster, a 62-year-old man named Ellis, noticed them. He'd been running this place for 15 years and could spot a phony from a mile away. He squinted, watching the whole thing go down. Something about the way the woman was handling those rifle parts, the specific angle of her wrists, her slow, steady breathing, it was different. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4. His jaw tightened. He'd seen that breathing technique before, but only in very, very dangerous places. The Admiral leaned in, his voice a low growl. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, whether you're a private or a janitor or whatever the hell you are." For just a fraction of a second, the woman's hands stopped. Then, just as calmly, she set down the part she was cleaning. Not a single nerve twitched. When she finally looked up, her eyes were a cool, stormy gray that met the Admiral's glare without a flicker of fear. "No rank to report, sir," she said, her voice steady and quiet. "I'm just here to shoot." Brooks let out a loud, obnoxious snort. "Just here to shoot. Did you hear that, Admiral?" He turned to the others. "Somebody better hold her hand. The kick on that rifle is a real monster." Another officer joined in, grinning. "Yeah, we should probably spot for her. Make sure she doesn't hurt herself," he added. "Or, embarrass the entire military." Ellis's hand instinctively moved toward the radio on his hip, but he hesitated. His eyes were glued to the woman. 444, box breathing. It was a technique drilled into the most elite special operators in the world. He glanced at her hands again, the way she held the bolt, perfectly positioned for a lightning-fast reassembly in total darkness. A knot formed in his stomach as the Admiral puffed out his chest. "Are you even authorized to be on this range?" he demanded. "Yes, sir." "And you plan on firing that weapon?" "Yes, sir." "From what distance?" For the first time, the faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. 800 meters, sir." The officers burst into laughter. Brooks actually slapped his knee. 800! That's hilarious. He looked at the Admiral. "Sir, with all due respect, I have to watch this. It'll be a good lesson for the men in what not to do." The Admiral's face was unreadable, but his eyes glinted with cold amusement. "By all means, Lieutenant, let's see what our little friend can do." He waved a hand toward the firing line. "Go on, show us what you've got." The woman stood up in one smooth, powerful motion, without even using her hands to push off the ground. Her uniform was standard issue, faded and worn, with no patches to give away who she was. She picked up the rifle she'd already reassembled, gave it a quick safety check, and walked over to lane 7. Ellis found himself walking toward her without even realizing it, a strange mix of dread and excitement building in his chest. The woman settled in at the bench, her form absolutely perfect. Left hand under the stock, right hand on the grip, body perfectly aligned. Brooks leaned back, arms folded. Someone get her a pallet of ammo. She's gonna need a lot of practice just to hit the paper from that far. Does she even know how to take the safety off? Another one snickered. She probably thinks the scope is for bird watching, a third chimed in. But the Admiral wasn't laughing anymore. He was watching her, his focus intense. The woman ignored every single one of them. She just kept breathing. 4, 4, 4. Her trigger finger was straight, resting alongside the trigger guard, perfect discipline. She reached up and made a tiny adjustment to the scope, then another for the wind. The movements were so small, so precise, they were the kind you can only make after a lifetime of practice. Ellis was now just 10 feet away, close enough to see everything. His heart started pounding. He knew that stance. He'd seen it only twice before, both times in situations so highly classified, he wasn't even supposed to know they existed. "Any day now," the Admiral called out, his voice dripping with fake politeness. "We're all waiting." The woman's breathing changed. She took 3 deep, slow breaths. On the 4th exhale, when her body was perfectly still, her finger slid onto the trigger. The first shot cracked through the air. The recoil barely moved her. Without taking her eye off the scope, she worked the bolt, chambered another round, settled, and breathed. The second shot followed. Then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. The entire sequence took just 18 seconds. Ellis didn't even have to look. He already knew, but he lifted his spotting scope anyway and focused on the target 800 meters downrange. And there they were, in the dead center of the bullseye, 5 holes. They were grouped so tightly you could cover them with a quarter. He lowered the scope, his hands shaking a little. Brooks and the other officers were completely silent, their jaws hanging open as they stared at the live feed on the tower monitor. The digital scoreboard flashed the results. 5 shots, 5 tens, a perfect score, from 800 meters in 18 seconds. The Admiral's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it would shatter. He stomped over to the monitor. "Check that rangefinder," he barked. "It's calibrated every morning, sir," Ellis said, his voice raspy. "It's right." "Check it again." A young officer sprinted out with a handheld laser. "Distance confirmed, sir, 800 meters. Brooks just stared at the woman. She was sitting back from her rifle, hands resting in her lap, looking as calm as if she'd just been reading a book. He cleared his throat, trying to sound confident. "Lucky shots. The wind must have dropped." Then he squinted at her rifle. "That's a custom scope, isn't it?" She just looked at him with those unreadable eyes. "What kind of scope is that?" Brooks demanded, his voice cracking. "Standard issue, Leopold," she said flatly. "Same one you have." "No way. Nobody shoots like that with standard gear." He turned to the Admiral. "Sir, I want to inspect her weapon. It has to be modified. There's something giving her an unfair advantage." The Admiral gave a sharp nod. "Do it." Brooks marched toward lane 7, reaching out to grab the rifle. She stood there, completely still, as he stomped over to her. He didn't even ask. He just grabbed the rifle off the bench, turning it over and over, his eyes scanning every inch for some kind of trick, the scope, the trigger assembly, the barrel. His face soured with disappointment when he found nothing. It was just a perfectly maintained, standard issue M110 rifle with a Leopold Mark V scope. No secret gadgets, no illegal mods. He slammed it back down. "Fine," he sneered. "So you can shoot. Big deal. Anyone can get a lucky streak. A gust of wind, a fluke, it means nothing." That's when Rangemaster Ellis couldn't help himself. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Lieutenant," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "that wasn't luck." "That's enough, Ellis. Stand down," Lieutenant Kane snapped, his voice hard as ice. "We've got this." Ellis snapped his mouth shut, but he couldn't take his eyes off the woman. She glanced at him for just a fraction of a second, and in that moment, a silent message passed between them, a flicker of acknowledgement, maybe even a warning to stay out of it. Then her focus was back on the rifle. Kane marched down to lane 7, the sound of his boots echoing on the concrete. He stopped right next to her and folded his arms, staring at her like she was some strange specimen under a microscope. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he barked. "Various places, sir." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I'm authorized to give you, sir." Another officer, Brooks, let out a smug laugh. "You're not authorized to do anything. You don't have any authorization. You're a nobody who got a lucky break." He leaned in closer, his voice dripping with condescension. "I bet someone trained you. Probably had you practice this one shot on this one range over and over just to put on a little show for the brass." The woman didn't even blink. Instead, she started breaking down the rifle, her hands moving with a smooth, practiced grace that only comes from thousands of hours of repetition. Kane's eyes narrowed, watching her. "If you're really as good as you want us to believe, you won't have a problem doing it again, this time under real-world conditions." She paused, her hand hovering over the bolt carrier group. "What conditions, sir?" "The official qualification test. Tomorrow morning, 0800. A different range, unknown distances, under a time limit. The works. You pass, you're certified. You fail." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "And you're banned from my range. Permanently. And I'll make sure the whole base knows you were a fraud. With all due respect, sir, I wasn't trying to impress anyone." "Then you'll have no problem proving it." Kane shot back, standing up straight. 0800. Bring your A game. And don't even think about chickening out, because I don't have time for phonies who waste my resources. Brooks grinned. "This'll be fun. I'll bring a camera, to document the official failure." The officers swaggered off, their laughter echoing across the range. From 20 feet away, Ellis just stood and watched. The woman finished disassembling the rifle with methodical precision, placing each part into its custom foam slot before closing the case. She stood, picked it up, and turned to leave. As she passed Ellis, she hesitated for a split second. Her eyes locked with his, and he saw something in them that made his blood run cold. It wasn't anger or fear. It was a profound, bone-deep patience, the look of someone who has been waiting an eternity for a moment just like this. "Rangemaster," she said, her voice a ghost of a whisper. That was it. And then she was gone, walking off into the afternoon sun, leaving tiny puffs of dust in her wake. He stared after her until she was just a speck in the distance. Then, with a hand that had started to shake, he raised his radio and switched to a secure channel. "Control, this is Rangemaster Ellis. I need to report something off the books." After a burst of static, a calm voice replied, "Go for it, Ellis." He took a deep breath, making sure no one was around. The shooter, the one who just put 5 rounds in the bullseye from 800 meters in under 20 seconds, I think. He had to stop and swallow. "I think you need to run her prints, and do it quietly. Because if I'm right about who she is, we have a massive problem on our hands." "Understood, Ellis. Send her lane number and the time. We'll handle it." Ellis lowered the radio, his gaze fixed on the empty lane 7, where the sandbags still held the faint outline of her rifle. The 5 shiny brass casings lay scattered on the ground, glinting in the low sun. 5 perfect shots. 18 seconds. From 800 meters away. He'd been a rangemaster for 15 years. He'd seen world-class champions, legendary special operators, and decorated Marine snipers. None of them, not a single one, had ever fired a group that tight, at that distance, that fast. Not in this world, anyway. He remembered her breathing a calm 444 count. He recalled her grip, her stance, and the chillingly serene look in her eyes, while a half-dozen officers berated her. She never rose to the bait, never got defensive, never explained herself. She just took it all, like someone who had survived so much worse. So much worse. She acted like a person who knows that words don't mean a thing when your target is half a mile away. Ellis bent down and picked up one of the casings, standard military issue brass. Nothing special about it, except for where it had sent its bullet. Without thinking, he slipped it into his pocket and started walking back toward the tower. His mind was racing, putting together puzzle pieces he desperately wished didn't fit, forming a picture he was terrified to look at. Because if his gut was right, Lieutenant Kane had just made the biggest, most career-ending mistake of his life. And tomorrow morning, when she showed up for that test, things were about to get very, very real. If you think a lucky shot is all she has, you have no idea what she's truly capable of. Hit that like button if you're ready to see some ice-cold justice served. And make sure you subscribe, because you won't want to miss these arrogant officers getting exactly what they have coming. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the range fell quiet. The last of the base personnel headed for their barracks, their voices fading into the evening air. Lane 7 was now empty, silent, and waiting. Tomorrow was going to be a day to remember. Meanwhile, inside the admin building at 5:15 p.m., Lieutenant Brooks was staring at his laptop, his coffee completely forgotten. He'd been replaying the same 18-second clip for the last 10 minutes. The woman, the rifle, 5 shots, 5 perfect bullseyes. The timestamp on the security footage read from 15:47:22 to 15:47:40. 18 seconds flat. It just didn't compute. He rewound it again, watching her settle into position, watching the rifle barely move with each shot, watching her work the bolt with a speed born from 10,000 hours of practice. And a pit formed in his stomach as he realized it was probably way more than that. You don't get that good on a military budget. His roommate Jensen walked in, dropping a gear bag with a thud. Still watching that? Dude, let it go. The girl was lucky. Lucky? Brooks said without looking up. 5 shots, 800 meters, 18 seconds, all dead center. That isn't luck, Jensen. Jensen just shrugged and started unlacing his boots. So she's good. The Army's full of good shots. Man, not this good, Brooks muttered. Not from that distance, not that fast. He finally looked away from the screen. I've been shooting for 8 years. I've been an expert marksman 3 years running. My personal best at 800 meters is 32 seconds for 5 shots. And I thought I was a rock star. She did it in 18 seconds, and her grouping was tighter than a drum. So she's better than you. Happens to the best of us. Get over it. But Brooks couldn't. Something about it was just wrong. It was her posture, the steady rhythm of her breath, the way she just stood there and took it while Kane and the others tore into her. It was like she'd heard it all before, like she'd faced things that made a dressing down from an officer feel like a minor inconvenience. He slammed the laptop shut and leaned back in his chair. I'm checking her equipment tomorrow morning before the test. Every piece, make sure it's 100% regulation. Dude, Kane already did that. I know what Kane did. I'm doing it myself. Something's not right here. She's too good, too calm. The story doesn't add up. Jensen gave him a long look. You know what I think? I think your ego is bruised because some random woman walked onto your range and made you look like an amateur in front of the brass. That's all this is. No, that's just not. Brooks stopped mid-sentence. Could Jensen be right? Was this just his bruised ego talking? Still, the facts were the facts. Nobody develops that kind of pinpoint accuracy without a serious history behind it. And whatever her story was, she was guarding it like a state secret. Her uniform was a ghost, no name, no rank, no unit insignia. All he saw was a standard issue uniform, a rifle, and a skill set that was completely out of place for the nobody she appeared to be. He pushed himself up and grabbed his coat. I'm going to check the databases, see what pops up. You don't even have a name to go on. I've got her face, Brooks retorted, and the exact time she was in my lane. It's a place to start. He walked toward the door, then paused. And if I'm right about this, if she's hiding something, then tomorrow's qualification test is going to be one for the books. Shaking his head, Jensen just fiddled with his phone. Yeah, whatever you say, buddy. Just make sure to call me when you find out she's just some random private with a chip on her shoulder. I want to be the first one to laugh at you. Brooks didn't bother replying. He stepped out into the cold, empty hallway, the buzz of the overhead fluorescent lights, the only sound. He took the stairs down to the main floor, 2 at a time, making a beeline for the administration building. Everything was digital these days. Personnel files, security clearances, service histories, all linked together across every single branch of the military. If she was a real soldier, her file had to be in there. And if she wasn't, well, that opened up a whole different level of trouble. He swiped his ID card, and the lock on the personnel office door clicked open. It was well after closing time, but his rank gave him access. The room was completely dark, except for the soft glow of a computer monitor that was fast asleep. He sank into the nearest chair, logged in, and immediately brought up the digital access records for the firing range for that day. He scrolled through the list to lane 7, looking for the time between 1545 and 1600. He located the entry, but where her name was supposed to be, there was just a blank space. The only information was a brief note: walk on, entry approved by Rangemaster Ellis. Brooks frowned. That wasn't protocol. Every single person who wasn't on the schedule had to present identification. It was a hard and fast rule. How in the world did this woman get past the front desk without even giving them a name? He navigated over to the security camera footage, found the camera that covered the check-in counter, and rewound the video to 1530. And just like that, there she was, striding up to the desk and showing the clerk something. The clerk gave it a quick look, tapped a couple of keys on his keyboard, and then simply waved her through. The entire interaction was over in less than 30 seconds. Brooks magnified the image, trying to get a clear look at what was in her hand. She was holding some type of card, but the camera's resolution was too poor to make out any of the details. It might have been a standard military ID, or it could have been something else entirely. To make matters worse, the clerk's computer monitor was angled away from the camera's view, so he had no way of knowing what was entered into the system. It was a total dead end. Leaning back, Brooks felt a wave of pure frustration wash over him. He was missing a vital clue, the one piece that would explain who she was and what she was doing on his range. He replayed the scene in his mind, focusing on how Rangemaster Ellis had behaved the way the older man had shut down completely after watching her shoot. And then it hit him. The encrypted radio call Ellis had made. Brooks had seen him do it. He'd watched Ellis purposely step away from the crowd before using his radio, as if he was worried someone might overhear him. Ellis definitely knew something. Brooks was absolutely sure of it. And first thing in the morning, long before that test started, he was going to get some answers. Meanwhile, in the Rangemaster's office at 5:45 p.m., Ellis was just sitting at his desk, staring blankly at the phone. His hands were clasped together on the desk blotter. The call had come in 20 minutes earlier. It had lasted less than 5 minutes. But in that short time, his entire world had been flipped on its head. The voice on the line was cool and professional, the kind that didn't waste a single syllable. Rangemaster Ellis, this is Colonel Vance from G2. We've reviewed the inquiry you submitted this afternoon. The individual you're asking about is fully authorized to be on your range. Beyond that authorization, I cannot provide you with any further details. Is that understood, sir? But I need to know. What you need to know is that she is authorized. That is the end of it. You will not run her fingerprints. You will not flag her access credentials. And you will not, under any circumstances, mention this conversation to anyone outside of a secure communication channel. Are we perfectly clear, Rangemaster? Ellis could feel his mouth go completely dry. Yes, sir, perfectly clear. Excellent. And Ellis, if she participates in the test tomorrow, you will allow her to participate. Do not interfere in any way. That is a direct order. The line clicked dead before Ellis could even formulate a response. Now, he sat in the deepening quiet of his office, his mind racing to put the pieces together. G2. That's military intelligence. They don't get involved in the daily grind of a firing range. They never make calls to a place like Fort Davidson unless something really, really important is happening. Something that was clearly classified as need to know and was way, way above his pay grade. He had been in the Army long enough to understand what wasn't being said. The carefully vague responses, the direct commands disguised as simple requests, and the unspoken threat that asking one more question would be a very bad career move. This woman wasn't just some talented marksman. She was something else entirely. Someone protected. The kind of person who could make high-ranking colonels from intelligence pick up the phone and tell a simple range master to back off and forget what he saw. Ellis slid open his desk drawer and took out the spent bullet casing he had quietly picked up from her lane. He rolled it around in his fingers. It was just a standard brass casing, but the way she had fired it, with that cold, inhuman precision and impossible speed, was anything but standard. It was something else entirely. He thought about the tattoo he had barely glimpsed when she was putting her rifle back together. Her sleeve had shifted up for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough for him to see a burst of ink on her forearm. It was all dark, geometric shapes. He didn't get a good look, but it was there. And if his instincts about who she was were correct, that tattoo would tell a very specific and very dangerous story. Tomorrow morning, when she walked onto that range for the qualification test, things were about to get seriously complicated because Admiral Kane had absolutely no idea who he was about to challenge. And Brooks, with his wounded pride and his burning desire to prove he was right, was going to challenge her. He was going to push her until she broke. But when you push someone like her, someone with that kind of history, that kind of training, you don't get the reaction you're looking for. You get something much, much scarier. Ellis grabbed his phone, his thumb flying through his contact list until he landed on a name he hadn't called in 3 years. Master Sergeant Lin, retired. Lin was living out in Mesa these days, a drive of about 40 minutes. Lin had been a specialist, the kind of guy who spent 2 decades in places that don't officially exist, doing jobs that never end up in any official report. If there was anyone who could confirm Ellis's hunch, it was him. He hit the call button. The phone rang just twice before a rough, gravelly voice answered. Ellis, long time no hear. Lin, I need to ask you something. This is strictly off the record. A short silence hung in the air. I'm listening. If I were to tell you about a shooter, female, maybe late 20s, no visible rank or unit patches, fires 5 perfect bullseyes at 800 meters in less than 20 seconds using standard equipment, what would your guess be? The silence on the other end of the line was much longer this time. When Lin finally spoke, his voice had changed. It was cold, hard. I'd tell you to stop asking questions and walk away, Ellis. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Ellis, listen to me very carefully. If you have someone like that on your base, you just do your job and keep your head down. You don't ask questions. You don't make guesses. And you absolutely do not get in her way. Kaine is pushing her. He set up a public qualification test for tomorrow. He's looking to make an example of her. Lin let out a soft string of curse words. Then Kane is an idiot, and you need to prepare for things to get out of hand. How out of hand? The kind of out of hand that brings in investigators you can't answer to, Lin said. The kind that gets red flagged all the way up to the Pentagon. Ellis, I'm being serious. If she's who I suspect she is, you're not dealing with some young soldier trying to make a name for herself. You're dealing with someone who has seen and survived the absolute worst things this world has to offer and came out on the other side. And if Kaine pushes her too far, Lin trailed off. Just be ready. That's the only advice I can give you. The call ended. Ellis slowly put the phone down. He noticed his hands were trembling again. He glanced at the bullet casing one more time before dropping it back in the drawer and locking it. Tomorrow morning, 800 hours. Lane 3, the qualification test. It would be a different range, a different setup, with every ounce of pressure Admiral Kane could muster. And somewhere on that base, the woman with no name and eyes that looked like a coming storm was getting ready. She wasn't worried. She wasn't on edge. She was simply preparing, because whatever Admiral Kaine thought was going to happen tomorrow, he was mistaken. Completely and utterly mistaken. Ellis got to his feet, turned off his desk lamp, and headed for the door. As he walked out into the crisp desert night, he offered up a quiet prayer. It wasn't for the woman. She didn't need anyone's prayers. He said it for Kaine, because tomorrow morning, the Admiral was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating people, and that lesson was going to be delivered from 800 meters away in less than 20 seconds. In her temporary room in Building 12, at 2200 hours, the space was small and stark. The cinder block walls were painted a boring institutional beige, and the only furniture was a single cot, a metal locker, and a small desk and chair that were bolted to the floor. They thought they'd killed her 3 years ago, a ghost erased from the official records. But in this sterile, temporary room, the ghost was very much alive. Her only possession was a beat-up duffel bag on the floor, but the real story was written on her hands, glowing in the blue light of her laptop. She wasn't working. She was reading the chapters of her life etched into her own skin. Faint, web-like scars on her knuckles, tough calluses on her fingertips from a career spent on a trigger, and a thin white line on her ring finger where a medic had dug out a piece of shrapnel in the dirt. Every mark was a memory they couldn't erase, a part of a story they thought was over. They were about to learn they hadn't even reached the final chapter. And you're going to want to stick around to see how this story ends. With her sleeve finally rolled up, the truth of her past was laid bare. This wasn't just any tattoo. It was a permanent record covering her forearm. In the center of a sniper's crosshairs were the numbers 8, 4, and 7, inked with military precision. Below it, the words Death Angel were framed by the years 2018 to 2021. It wasn't art, it was an indictment. She gently traced the raised ink, feeling the weight of that number. 847 lives. A little secret no one knew? Not all of them were villains. Some were just kids, caught on the wrong side of a line they didn't draw. But they all had one thing in common. She was tasked to eliminate them, and she never, ever missed. A soft chime from her laptop broke the silence. A new email. The sender was an anonymous string of encrypted characters. She typed in the key from memory, and a message appeared. The plan was working perfectly. Their target, Kaine, had walked right into the trap. The test was set for 0800. A man named Brooks was getting too close, and someone named Ellis was hiding something. The instructions were clear. Move to phase 2, but only reveal her true identity if her back was against the wall. A package was confirmed for 23:30 hours. The message ended with 2 words that hit her like a punch. Good luck, Captain. She immediately erased the email, leaving no trace. It had been years since anyone had dared to call her captain. 3, to be exact. It had been 3 years since the bombing in Kabul that was supposed to have taken her life. 3 years since she'd spent 8 months chained to a chair in a dark basement, enduring endless questions and unspeakable horrors from men with dead eyes. They were absolutely convinced they had shattered her spirit. What a mistake that was. You see, you can't truly break someone who has already made peace with their own death. You can inflict pain, you can make them scream until their voice gives out, but you can't steal their will if they've already let go of everything else. She survived by becoming a hollow shell, just waiting for her moment. And when they finally slipped up, leaving her alone for just 15 minutes, she snapped a piece of rebar from the wall, took out 3 of them, and calmly walked right out the front door. Barefoot and bleeding, she navigated 12 miles of hostile territory under the cover of darkness, only to be nearly shot by the very border guards she was trying to reach for help. The special ops team that airlifted her out didn't waste time with pleasantries. They just wrapped her in a blanket and flew. The debriefings, the doctors, and the psych evaluations all came later. And then came the verdict from the higher-ups. Captain Vera Cross was now a liability. Her cover was blown. To protect everyone, she had to disappear completely. And just like that, they gave her a new name and wiped her entire existence away. Her old call sign, Ghost, suddenly became her new reality. For 3 long years, she drifted from one dead-end job to another, living completely off the grid, trying to figure out who she was without the title Death Angel. But then, a piece of information found its way to her, and everything changed. The same corrupt network that had taken her father's life and left her for dead was still operating, embedded deep within the military itself. They were selling secrets and getting good people killed, all for money. Their next target was an admiral named Victor Kane, not because he was dirty, but because he was about to expose all of it. The man knew way too much. 8 years ago, he and Vera's father, Brigadier General David Cross, had started an investigation that got dangerously close to revealing the whole conspiracy. But that investigation died the day her father was killed by a car bomb just outside their family home. Vera was just 13. She saw it all on the news, the fire, the body bag. her mother's collapse at the funeral. Then, she watched as the official cause of death was ruled a mechanical failure, a complete lie. That day, she learned a bitter lesson. The system won't always protect you. Sometimes, you have to become the justice you seek. So at 18, she joined up, fought her way through the ranks, and became so good at her job that a man named Jakok recruited her for a secret war nobody ever heard about. With every target she eliminated, she was secretly working through a list of her own 23 names connected to her father's murder, hidden among her 847 confirmed kills. These people thought they were untouchable. They were dead wrong. But she soon realized the network was much bigger than she ever imagined. And now, they were targeting Kaine. That was the signal. It was time for the ghost to return. It was time to play the one card they never knew she held. She was still alive. Death Angel wasn't buried in Kabul, and tomorrow morning, when Kaine and Brooks try to publicly humiliate her with bogus fraud charges, they're going to get the surprise of their lives. That's when they'll see the tattoo. That's when the truth will finally come out. This isn't about fame or glory. She knows that gets you killed. This is about sending a message. Kaine needs to know his life is in danger, and Brooks needs to see he's just a pawn. Sometimes, the only way to win is to flip the entire game board upside down. A sudden knock on her door, 3 sharp taps, a pause, then 2 more, the signal. It was the package. Vera opened the door just enough to see a man with an emotionless face, who handed her a small case, nodded once, and disappeared down the hall. She locked the door, set the case on the desk, and opened it. Inside was a secure, untraceable phone and a single photograph. It showed Admiral Kane leaving his house just 2 hours earlier. But lurking in the background was a dark sedan with tinted windows. Her heart stopped. It was the same model of car that had been parked on her street the night her father died. The license plate was different, but it was their signature. They were arrogant. She put the photo down and picked up the phone. It was already on, showing just one contact, Tower 4. But she wouldn't make the call just yet. First, Kaine had to see her. He had to understand exactly who was hunting his hunters. After that, she would make the call. After that, it was time for phase 3. Vera pulled her sleeve down, concealing the tattoo once more. She lay back on the cot, hands behind her head, staring at the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, but that was fine. She had been trained to function without it, to push past every limit of pain and exhaustion. Jakok had made sure of that. Tomorrow, at 0800, Kaine and Brooks would try their best to destroy her. They were about to fail in the most spectacular way possible, kicking off a firestorm they couldn't possibly control. A storm that would only end when the entire corrupt network was burned to the ground and justice was finally served. Justice wasn't supposed to be clean. The real kind, the kind that was long overdue, was messy. She had accounted for 847 souls. 23 were for her father. The others were for her country, her squad, the mission. But tomorrow wasn't about adding to that number. Tomorrow was about making sure Target 848 never even had a chance to exist. It was about keeping a man named Kaine breathing long enough to talk. It was about making certain the people who took her dad from this world could never hurt anyone else again. Closing her eyes, she breathed in a slow 4 count, held for 4, and exhaled for 4. It was the same rhythm that anchored her during firefights, that kept her steady through interrogations, and that got her through 3 endless years in hiding. It was the rhythm that would carry her through tomorrow, because she was more than a weapon, more than a soldier. She was a promise, sealed in blood and kept in the quiet places. A promise that says the guilty will face the music, that the dead will get their due, and that the system, no matter how broken it is, can be forced to do what's right if someone is willing to foot the bill. Vera Cross had been paying that bill for 16 years. Ever since the day her father was ripped away from her. Ever since she learned that some debts can only be settled one way, with absolute patience, surgical precision, and a cold, unwavering focus that doesn't quit until the job is done. Tomorrow morning, the mission continues. And Admiral Kane, whether he knows it or not, is about to become a very important piece of the puzzle. A protected piece. the kind that gets to keep living because someone else decided he was worth the ultimate price. She hoped he was. She really, truly did. Because if this all blows up in her face, if the enemy figures out her play, then everything, all 16 years, all 847 lives will have meant nothing. But it wouldn't. She simply wouldn't let it. They called her Death Angel for a reason. She never missed. Not from 800 meters, not from half a mile away. Never. The ceiling fan above her turned in lazy circles, chopping up the silent air. From the hallway, she could hear the sounds of life, footsteps, a faint laugh, a muffled shout, the soundtrack of a normal world. The kind of life she vaguely remembered from a lifetime ago, before she became this. Before the ink on her skin, before the list of names, before everything went dark. Maybe, just maybe, when the dust settled, she could have that again. Maybe she could just be Vera Cross, a daughter who served her country, instead of Death Angel, a ghost with a rifle. Maybe her future didn't have to end in a windowless room, tied to a chair, while men with no faces asked questions she would rather die than answer. Maybe. But tomorrow had to come first. The test, the reveal. That one single moment when Admiral Victor Kane would see the tattoo on her arm and it would all click into place. He wasn't just dealing with some random sharpshooter. He was dealing with the woman who dragged him out of a losing firefight in a dusty valley in Afghanistan 5 years ago. The woman who, according to every official record, had been dead for the last 3 years. The woman who was about to inform him that he was next on their kill list. Unless she could stop them first. And she would stop them. No matter what it took, no matter who stood in her way, the mission was all that mattered. It was all she had left. Vera opened her eyes, fixing her gaze on a photograph on the desk. Kine, his car, the enemy moving in. She burned the scene into her mind, then grabbed the photo, tore it into a dozen tiny pieces, and sent it down the toilet. Every trace was gone. She'd covered her tracks perfectly. Everything was in its place. Tomorrow, 0800 hours, Fort Davidson qualification range, lane 3. The setup would be different, the conditions would be different, but the outcome would be exactly the same. The only thing that ever really changes is the distance. The fundamentals are forever. Breathe, settle, squeeze. Repeat until the threat is gone, until the mission is complete, until justice is finally served. She lay back on the thin mattress. For the first time in a long time, sleep actually came. It wasn't peaceful, not by a long shot, but it was something. And in that sleep, she dreamed, not of the dark places, not of the interrogations, but of her dad. He was in their old kitchen, flipping pancakes at the stove, smiling, alive, just like he was before the bomb, before the conspiracy, before the world came crashing down. In the dream, he looked right at her and said, "I'm so proud of you, Vera. Now finish it." And she would. It would all kick off tomorrow, at precisely 0800 hours. It would start with 5 flawless shots and one very, very stunned Admiral. The fan kept spinning, the night deepened, and Death Angel slept, dreaming of the justice she was about to deliver. The early morning air still carried the bite of the desert night. The firing range was on the far side of Fort Davidson, a place designed for official tests with zero ambiguity. It had concrete shooting lanes, standardized targets, and enough cameras to catch every twitch and breath. Nothing was being left to chance. Admiral Kine arrived early, with 4 officers in tow, including Brooks. They all positioned themselves in an observation tower with a perfect view of Lane 3. Have you ever been set up for a fall so public that people actually gather to watch you crash and burn? That was the scene at 7:58 in the morning. Lieutenant Brooks was acting like the master of ceremonies, holding a clipboard loaded with regulations he'd likely memorized before dawn, ready to write up her every failure. The range master, a guy named Ellis, looked exhausted, like he knew on a gut level that no amount of rules could stop the train wreck he felt was coming. An order had come from on high, from Colonel Vance himself, just let it happen. But every one of Ellis's instincts was screaming that today was going to be a disaster. Word had spread across the entire base about the mysterious woman who had shown up and made a fool of a top admiral. Now, Everyone was here for the sequel, to see her get knocked down a peg. They all wanted to see that yesterday was a fluke, that the universe still worked the way it was supposed to, a universe where skill always matched the rank on your collar. Brooks checked his watch. 2 minutes left. Admiral Kine was silent, ignoring Brooks's question about whether she'd even have the nerve to show up. Something about her performance yesterday was stuck in his head, that controlled breathing, the absolute ice water calm she had under pressure. He'd only ever seen that kind of focus in elite operators, the kind who ran missions so secret they'd be denied for the next 50 years. Then, right at 0800, she appeared. She was in the same plain uniform with no insignia, carrying a rifle case. The crowd literally parted for her as she walked, her eyes fixed on shooting lane 3, completely ignoring the stairs. Brooks stepped right into her path. "I'm gonna need to inspect your weapon and your gear before we get started." She just stopped and stared at him, not saying a word. "Regulations clearly state," he announced, puffing out his chest for everyone to see, "that any personal firearms require a full pre-qualification inspection." Open the case. Without a word, she placed it on the ground and flipped the latches. Brooks dropped to his knees and began to tear it down. He examined the stock, the receiver, the scope, the barrel. He cross-referenced every serial number. He measured the trigger pull. He inspected the scope mounts. And with every single component that was perfectly within regulations, you could see the frustration building on his face. He couldn't find a single thing to call her on. Finally, he slammed the case shut. "Fine. You're cleared to proceed," he grumbled, getting back on his feet. "But just so you know, the target is at 1,000 meters today, not 800. That's a completely different league. You get 3 tries, 5 shots each. You need to score a minimum of 45 out of 50 to qualify. And just so we're absolutely clear," he added with a nasty little smile, "we have cameras recording every possible angle this time." She just picked up her case, walked to lane 3, and started to set up her gear. The crowd moved in a little closer, and someone cracked a joke about needing a telescope just to watch her miss. The whole thing felt more like a public spectacle than a military exercise. The range officer's voice crackled over the speakers. "Shooter, you have 10 minutes to prepare. 3 attempts, 5 shots per attempt. A minimum score of 45 is required. The range is now hot. You may fire when you are ready." She got into position behind the rifle, her every move efficient and smooth. She adjusted the scope, took one slow, deliberate breath, and settled into that steady rhythm. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Brooks leaned over to Kine. "Watch this," he whispered. "This first shot is going to be way off. A classic rookie mistake at this distance." The rifle cracked, a sharp, clean sound that cut through the morning air. 1,000 meters downrange, the target camera feed lit up, showing the result, a perfect hit, dead center in the 10-point ring. Brooks just blinked. "Lucky shot," he mumbled under his breath. The wind must have given her a hand. The second shot came, just as precise and unhurried as the first. The screen showed another perfect 10. The crowd went completely quiet. The whispering stopped. People started leaning forward, actually watching. The third, fourth, and fifth shots all punched through the exact same hole, creating a single, ragged group in the center of the target. 50 out of 50 points on her very first try. Brooks's face turned ghost white as he stared at the monitor. "Check the rangefinder," he stammered to the operator. "That can't possibly be right." Ellis's voice came back over the radio, perfectly calm. "All systems are green, sir. The range is 1,000 meters, plus or minus 0.3. We ran a full calibration this morning, strictly by the book." Kine took a step closer to the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He stared at the target, unable to believe what he was seeing. 5 bullet holes, so close together you could hide them with your knuckles. From 1,000 meters away, with the wind playing tricks, this wasn't just skill, it was something else entirely. His mind raced, putting the pieces together, her calm breathing, her perfect posture, the impossible accuracy. Just as the range officer called for the second round, Lieutenant Brooks held up a hand. "Hold on, we're changing things up. Move her to lane 5. Over the radio, the safety officer's voice was sharp. "Lieutenant, you can't do that. It's against protocol. I'm the ranking officer, and I'm making a safety call. Brooks shot back, lying through his teeth. Lane 3 is getting a windbreak from the trees. Lane 5 is wide open. If she's as good as she wants us to believe, this won't be a problem. Admiral Kane, watching from the side, gave a slow, cold nod. Make it happen. Without a single complaint, the woman, Vera, just packed her rifle and moved down to Lane 5. Everyone knew what this was. A deliberate attempt to mess with her, to throw her off her game. But she showed absolutely zero emotion. She just set up her gear, went through her methodical checklist, and settled into that same steady rhythm of breathing. The wind at Lane 5 was a beast. You could see the range flags practically ripping off their poles in the 10-mile-per-hour gusts. Brooks was smug, certain this would expose her as a fraud. 5 more shots echoed across the range, each one perfectly timed. And downrange, 5 more holes appeared dead center in the target. Another flawless 50 points, for a total of 100 out of 100. A dead silence fell over the crowd. The whispers and mockery were gone, replaced by pure, slack-jawed astonishment. People started pulling out their phones, recording the impossible thing they were witnessing. Brooks was so stunned, his clipboard slipped from his fingers and clattered on the concrete. For the 3rd attempt, I want to. Enough, Admiral Kane interrupted, his voice low but carrying absolute authority. There won't be a 3rd attempt. She's passed. She's more than passed. Kane walked straight over to her shooting station. Who was your trainer? He demanded. Vera kept her eyes on the target. I had several instructors, sir. That's a non-answer, Kane snapped. It's the only one I'm authorized to give you, sir, she replied calmly. Kane's jaw tightened in frustration. Let me see your identification and your complete service record, right now. She finally looked up, and her cool, gray eyes met his without a hint of fear. With all due respect, sir, I don't think you want to do that. Not out here, not with everyone watching. I wasn't asking, Kane growled. Brooks stomped over, trying to look tough. Show us your ID and your orders. Prove you have any right to be on this installation. For all we know, this is some kind of elaborate prank. He then made a huge mistake. He reached out and grabbed her arm to pull her up. His hand clamped down hard on her left forearm. The moment he pulled, her uniform sleeve slid up, revealing a tattoo for everyone to see. It was a sniper's crosshairs, and right in the center was the number 847. Underneath it, the words Death Angel were written above the dates 2018 to 2021, alongside the unmistakable Eagle and Dagger insignia of the Joint Special Operations Command. Brooks froze solid, his hand still on her arm, his jaw hanging open. A wave of hushed whispers rolled through the spectators. People nearby started pointing in the control tower. The safety officer went ghost white and had to grab the console to steady himself. He knew. He immediately keyed his radio. All personnel, stand down. I repeat, all range personnel, stand down immediately. Kane just stared at the tattoo, his face cycling through confusion, then shock, then dawning recognition, and finally, abject horror. His lips moved, forming a name he couldn't say out loud. Then he whispered it, 847. With a calm tug, she pulled her arm free. Brooks snatched his hand back like he'd just touched a hot stove. She simply rolled her sleeve back down, but it was too late. They had all just seen a ghost. Kane's voice was barely audible. Your ghost. That name fell like a bomb, silencing the entire range. All 50 people stood like statues. Ghost, call sign 847, was a legend, an operator who had been officially declared killed in action 3 years ago, and she was standing right there. An old-timer in a veteran's hat pushed his way to the front. It was Master Sergeant Lin, retired, who had driven hours to be there after a cryptic call. He stopped about 10 feet away, his eyes fixed on her, his expression one of pure awe. Death Angel, he breathed. Operation Silent Dawn. Afghanistan, 2020. You saved the Admiral's entire team in that valley. They said you took out 30 hostiles in under 6 minutes by yourself. The record said your longest shot was over 1,200 meters, Lin said, his voice choked with emotion. The official report said you died during the Kabul withdrawal. Want to find out how a soldier who's been dead for 3 years suddenly appears to save the day? Hit that share button, because this is a story everyone needs to see. Vera finally stood and faced Admiral Kane. My name is Captain Vera Cross, Joint Special Operations Command, assigned to sniper operations from 2018 through 2021. 847 confirmed kills. And you, Admiral Kane, are about to be assassinated. Kane flinched as if he'd been struck. What are you talking about? The same people who arranged my father's death, Brigadier General David Cross, back in 2016, are now coming for you. They know you're scheduled to testify before Congress. They know about the evidence you have, and they're going to kill you before you ever get on that stand. Brooks finally found his voice, though it was trembling badly. That's insane. Vera's sharp gaze snapped to him. Lieutenant Brooks, how long has your family been receiving threats? When did they start sending you those photos? The ones of your wife, Sarah, walking to her car after work? Or of your kids, Emma and Lucas, on the playground at school? Brooks's face turned to a mask of pure terror. How do you know their names? Because, Vera said, her voice turning dangerously quiet. The people threatening your family are the same ones who sent me to die in Kabul. They've been blackmailing you, using your wife and children to force you to sabotage anyone who gets close to the Admiral. And right now, they are holding your family captive. The clipboard Brooks had picked up fell again, hitting the ground with a loud crack. He began to shake violently. You don't know anything about this. Warehouse on the south end of the base, she said without blinking. 2 guards outside, 3 more inside with your family. You've been getting coded instructions for the past 6 weeks, haven't you? She went on, laying out his entire nightmare. It was small stuff at first, leaking schedules, changing duty rosters. Then they ordered you to interfere with anyone asking too many questions about the Admiral's security. When I showed up, your specific orders were to make sure I failed this qualification in the most humiliating way possible. Brooks staggered back, his face collapsing in on itself. I didn't have a choice, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. They sent me pictures. They showed me what they would do to them if I didn't cooperate. I had to do it. I know, Vera said, her tone softening just a fraction. And that's why I'm here. We're going to get them back. Kane was still reeling, trying to connect the dots, this legendary soldier back from the dead, a conspiracy he thought long buried, and a direct threat on his life. If all of this is true, why the circus act? Why not just come to me directly? Because, she said, her eyes locking onto his, I had to find out which person on your staff was the mole. I needed to force the enemy's hand to make them think their plan was working, she continued, her gaze unwavering. And I needed you to witness for yourself what I'm capable of. Before I told you that your life was on the line, 5 years ago, in that valley, you got on the radio and asked me who I was. I told you it didn't matter. All that mattered was you staying alive. The same thing is true today, Admiral. You just need to survive long enough to testify. I'll handle the rest. Master Sergeant Lin stepped forward, his back straight. Captain Cross, tell us what you need. We need to hit that warehouse and rescue Lieutenant Brooks's family, she said, instantly taking command. I have 43 minutes until they're moved to a second location. If that happens, they're gone for good. She then turned her attention to the shattered Lieutenant Brooks. I can get them back safely, but I need your help. You need to tell me every single thing you know. Now, imagine being forced to betray everything you stand for, just to keep your family alive. That was Lieutenant Brooks's nightmare for 6 agonizing weeks. Caught in an impossible trap, he finally broke, telling investigator Vera everything. He'd been taken, blindfolded, to a warehouse in the Southside Industrial District, just to see his wife and kids and know the threat was real. With the confession laid bare, Vera turned to Admiral Kane. Sir, I've been hunting this network for 3 months. I know their safe houses and their routines. I need your green light to run a hostage rescue right here on American soil. This time, there wasn't a flicker of doubt in Kane's eyes. It's yours. What else? Vera's gaze was steady. I need Lieutenant Brooks with me, and you need to stay right here, surrounded by every person in this room, until we're done. They won't dare touch you with this many witnesses. She took a deep breath. And I need Rangemaster Ellis to pull every second of security footage from 3 months back. I want a log of every vehicle that entered the industrial area between 2 and 4 in the morning. The person pulling the strings isn't some ghost halfway across the world. They're right here, on this base, someone high-ranking, someone we all trust. Ellis was already moving. I'm on it. The Admiral looked at Vera, truly seeing her for the first time, not just the uniform, but the woman who had saved his life, the woman who had survived 8 months of hell, and the woman who had spent 16 years hunting the people who murdered her father. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Her eyes locked with his. Because yesterday, you saw a nobody. Today, I needed you to see the ghost. The woman who saved your life. The one who never misses a shot. And now, I'm asking you to trust me one last time. Her voice became a low, intense whisper. 8 years ago, my father was your partner. You two were digging into procurement fraud. He found proof of a massive corruption ring buried deep within the military. The night before he was supposed to brief the Secretary of Defense, a bomb went off under his car. I was 13 years old. I watched it on the news, watched them carry away what was left of him in a bag. Her tone was flat, but it held the weight of a pain that never left. They ruled it a mechanical failure and closed the case. But I knew, even at 13, I knew they murdered him, so I waited. The day I turned 18, I enlisted. I clawed my way up, got recruited for a Black Ops unit, and on every single mission, every target I eliminated, I checked them against a list. A list of names tied to my father's murder. 23 of my 847 targets were on that list. 23 people who thought they'd gotten away with killing a brigadier general. Admiral Kane's face turned white. David Cross, he was my best friend, my partner. When he died, his voice cracked. I knew it wasn't an accident, but I had no proof, and I was scared. I had a wife, kids, so I kept my head down. I told myself there was nothing I could do. I know, Vera said softly. That's why I'm here. This isn't just about revenge. It's about finishing what he started, because the same people who killed my father are coming for you. And this time, I'm the one with the skills, the evidence, and the will to burn their entire network to the ground. But I need you alive to testify. I need Lieutenant Brooks here to choose redemption over fear. And I need exactly 42 minutes to pull off a rescue that saves 3 innocent people and cracks this whole conspiracy wide open. Brooks wiped the tears from his eyes. If you're wrong about any of this, my family dies, Kane dies, and they win. I'm not wrong, Lieutenant, Vera said. I'm giving you a single chance to be on the right side of history, to save your family and to help me finish what my father started. She slung a rifle case over her shoulder. So, are you with me? Brooks looked at Kane, who gave him a short, firm nod. Go, bring them home. And Brooks, you were put in a terrible position. This is your chance to make it right. Take it. A newfound strength squared Brooks's shoulders. Yes, sir. The crowd of onlookers parted for them like the Red Sea as Vera and Brooks walked toward the exit. Lynn, her trusted second-in-command, fell in right behind them. Then, seeing what was about to happen, 3 other veterans quietly joined their ranks. By the time they reached the parking lot, they were a 6-person team. They jumped into 2 SUVs, Vera behind the wheel of the first with Brooks riding shotgun. As they sped toward the Southside Industrial District, the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the desert. 41 minutes until the hostages were scheduled to be moved. It was 8:52 in the morning. The warehouse was a lone, rusty box, surrounded by a simple chain-link fence. 2 guards stood outside, sharing a smoke, their rifles hanging loosely from their shoulders. They clearly weren't expecting visitors. The network had operated without a single hitch for years, and it had made them sloppy. Vera parked 3 blocks away and gathered her small team. Brooks, you stay with the vehicles and keep the engines running. The second you see us emerge with your family, you hit the gas. Understood? I should be in there with you, he protested. You're too close to this, Vera shot back. You'll make a mistake. Let us do our jobs. She turned to Lynn and the others. We go in with non-lethal rounds if possible, but the hostages are the top priority. They walk out of there no matter what it takes. Lynn simply nodded. Protect the innocent. The rest is just noise. Vera glanced at her watch. 38 minutes. We go in 3 teams. They split up, melting into the shadows to approach from opposite directions. Vera from the east, Lynn from the west. The 2 guards outside never had a clue. 2 quiet hisses from suppressed rifles, and both men dropped, hit with tranquilizer darts. The team converged on the side door. Vera skipped the dramatic breach. Instead, she expertly picked the lock and eased the door open. Sometimes, silence is the most effective weapon. Inside, 3 more men were sitting around a small table, playing cards. Across the room, Sarah Brooks was tied to a chair. Her 2 young children huddled and bound at her feet, scared but unharmed. The card players didn't even have time to get to their feet. Vera's team moved into the room like a phantom, a blur of silent, overwhelming force. In less than 15 seconds, all 3 men were disarmed, secured with zip ties, and neutralized. Sarah was already sobbing with relief, pulling her children into a fierce hug. But Vera wasn't done. Rifle raised, she moved to a back office and kicked the door clean off its hinges. A woman was sitting at the desk. She looked to be in her early 50s, her gray hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun. The silver eagle of a full colonel gleamed on her uniform. It was Diane Frost, the deputy commander of the entire base. A woman everyone respected, the secret head of the entire rotten network. Frost looked up, completely unfazed. Captain Cross, I had a feeling you'd piece it all together eventually. Get up, Vera ordered, her voice flat. Hands where I can see them. Frost stood slowly, a condescending smirk on her face. You know, this doesn't change a thing. I'm just one small part of a much bigger machine. Maybe, Vera said, her voice dropping to a frigid calm, but you're the part that murdered my father, you're the part that sold out your own people, and you're the part that ends today. You are going to testify. You are going to give me every name, every bank account, every single piece of this operation. Because if you don't, Vera continued, you'll just disappear into a supermax prison. No deal, no protection, and no hope. You'll just be another forgotten traitor. Frost let out a cold, empty laugh. You think I'm afraid of prison? No, Vera said, stepping closer. But you're terrified of being irrelevant, of being forgotten, of rotting in a cage while the machine you built moves on without you. Testify, and you get to be the one who burns it all down. Your name goes in the history books as the whistleblower, refuse, and you're nothing. For the first time, a flicker of something, fear, or maybe cold calculation flashed in Frost's eyes. On your knees, Vera commanded softly, hands behind your head. After a long, tense moment, the colonel slowly knelt. Lynn moved in, snapping handcuffs onto Frost's wrists. Outside, Brooks saw his family walking out of the warehouse. Sarah ran straight into his arms as their children clung to his legs. He collapsed to his knees, pulling them all into a massive, tear-soaked hug. I'm so sorry. I should have. You saved us, Sarah whispered, cutting him off. That's all that matters. Vera emerged last, marching Frost in front of her at gunpoint. By now, Admiral Kane had arrived with a full escort of military police, and a helicopter was circling overhead. The entire base was on lockdown. Kane walked straight up to Frost, his face a mask of cold fury. Why? Frost remained silent. Why did you kill David Cross? Why did you target me? Why betray the oath you swore to this country? Frost finally met his gaze, her voice completely empty of emotion. Because the system is broken. Because the people at the top get rich, while soldiers at the bottom die for nothing. With Brooks's intel, Vera led a small, elite team and stormed the warehouse. It was over in minutes. The ringleader, a corrupt contractor named Frost, just sneered as she was cuffed. Someone has to profit from all this chaos, she said, and it might as well be us. Us? Kane's voice was ice. You said us. Who else is working with you? Frost just gave a smug smile and stayed silent. Vera stepped in. Oh, don't worry, she'll talk. They all do. Once they realize their alternative is watching their entire world burn down from a prison cell. As the military police hauled Frost and her 5 thugs away, medics were already with Sarah and the kids, who were terrified but unharmed. Brooks walked straight up to Vera, and in front of the Admiral and everyone else, he fell to one knee. "Captain Cross, I treated you with contempt. I publicly tried to humiliate you. I put you in danger, all while you were here protecting my family, stopping an assassination, and finishing a mission your own father started." His voice cracked with emotion. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking for your forgiveness," he said, looking at the ground. "You gave me back my entire world today. You gave me my family. You gave me a chance to fix the worst mistake of my life. I promise I will spend the rest of my days telling the story of what you did here." Vera looked down at him, her expression unreadable. "Get up, Lieutenant." He hesitated. "I don't." "Stand up," she said again, her voice firm but not harsh. "You were trapped in an impossible situation. You made the wrong choices for the right reasons, but when it really mattered, you chose to trust me and help. That's what counts." She paused for a beat. "Your family is safe now. That's all that's important. Go be with them." Brooks shakily got to his feet. "Thank you," he managed to say, "for everything." As he rushed to embrace his family, Admiral Kane walked over to stand beside Vera, a new level of respect in his eyes. Imagine being told your war hero father died in a freak training accident. You know it's a lie, but when you ask questions, the very system he gave his life for turns on you. They silence you, threaten you, and try to erase you. That's exactly what happened to Captain Vera Cross. They took her career, her name, and her father, but they made one mistake. They left her alive. You are not going to believe how one woman, with nothing but her skills and a thirst for justice, dismantled a conspiracy that went to the very top. Stick with me to see how she did it. And hey, if you love stories about true underdogs, hit that subscribe button for more. For years, Vera lived in the shadows. She was a ghost, moving from one rundown motel to the next, always paying in cash, never staying long enough to make a friend. Every dollar was spent carefully, every meal was cheap, and every night was a battle against the memories of her father, Brigadier General David Cross. He taught her to shoot, to lead, to honor the flag. And now, the men he trusted were the ones who put him in the ground. Her first big break came from a name whispered by a dying informant, Colonel Frost. But when Vera dug into Frost's record, she hit a wall. Every file was clean. Too clean. It was a dead end, a perfect trap, and walking into it almost cost her everything. She barely escaped with her life, realizing Frost's network had eyes everywhere. Desperate, she reached out to the one man she thought she could trust, her father's closest friend, Captain Kane. But when she finally got him on a secure line, his voice was ice. He told her to drop it, that she was chasing ghosts and dishonoring her father's memory. It was a soul-crushing blow. Was he part of it too? The sting of his betrayal was a surprise she never saw coming. With nowhere left to turn, Vera felt the last flicker of hope, dying. But then she remembered another old ghost, her father's former Master Sergeant Lynn, a man who had been retired for 3 years but still knew where all the bodies were buried. Lynn, grizzled and reluctant, finally agreed to help. He made one call and it changed everything. The big reveal wasn't just that Kane was a good man, but that he was a trapped one. Colonel Frost's network had their hooks in him deep, holding the safety of his family over his head. The corruption wasn't just about stealing millions in military contracts. It was about selling classified intelligence. Her father had stumbled upon it, and for that, he was silenced. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. Kane wasn't a traitor. He was a victim. She wasn't just fighting for her father's memory anymore. She was fighting to save a good man's family and soul. 3 months later, after the dust had settled and the congressional hearings were over, the justice Vera fought for came down like a hammer. Frost was sentenced to 35 years. 4 other colonels received between 20 and 30 years each, and a dozen more officers were court-martialed. The entire rotten network was shattered from the inside out. The man Kane had been forced to protect, Brooks, was cleared of all trumped-up charges and returned to duty, his family finally safe. As for Captain Kane, his 6 hours of testimony blew the lid off the procurement scandal, leading to a complete overhaul of military oversight. He retired with full honors, his name cleared, and his conscience clean. In the quiet aftermath, Kane found Vera watching the sunrise over the base. He snapped to attention, giving her a perfect salute. "On behalf of the United States Navy," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and on behalf of your father, who would be prouder than words can say, thank you." Vera returned the salute. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," Kane insisted. "You did so much more. You hunted my friend's killers while they hunted you. You gave up everything to finish what David and I started 8 years ago. And for my part in that, I am so sorry I was a coward. It took you coming back from the dead to make me remember what honor really means. You're testifying now," Vera said quietly. "That takes guts." He shook his head. "Only because you gave me a reason." Vera finally allowed herself a small, tired smile. Her father's death wasn't for nothing. The system he believed in, the one that had been corrupted, was finally working again. She officially retired, turning down the Medal of Honor. "Give it to someone who's still in the fight," she said. She bought a small, quiet house in New Mexico, ready for peace. But a week later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a photo of a military base and a note. "Tower 4 sends regards. One name remains." Vera stared at the photo, at the circled figure in the background, before tucking it away. Real justice is patient, and after 16 years, she knew all about patience. For now, she was just Vera, a daughter and a survivor, enjoying her coffee as she watched the desert sunrise. But her rifle case was clean, oiled, and ready. The mission might be postponed, but it was never over, because some promises don't have an expiration date. Every soldier has a story most people will never hear. Thanks for listening to this one, and make sure you subscribe to MVB Story for more.